How's it going, everybody? This is the Uncanny Omar from Near Mint Condition, and today I have the pleasure of talking to Sara Frazetta. And how are you doing?
I'm good, Omar. Thank you for having me today. This is great.
It's my pleasure.
And
It's
thank you,
my
Nick
pleasure.
Ferrucci, for making this introduction with us. This is great.
Yeah, and Nick and the folks at Dynamite for helping us get connected and talking about the projects and, of course, the legacy of your grandfather, Frank Frazetta, and what other projects are coming around. But focusing on the Fire and Ice, which this one took me by surprise. I was a big fan of the movie when I was a kid, and I had a worn down VHS copy that we ended up finding a long time ago. But I think I want to say that was the first time I ever saw the Frazetta name, and it's sticking
With
out.
Fire and Ice. Yeah.
Yeah, like on that old VHS copy that I had, and
So when you
yeah.
said it took you by surprise, what do you mean? Like, tell me what are your thoughts?
Okay, so when I think of Fire and Ice, I think of a property that I grew up with that I was a big fan of
Hmm.
and nostalgic for. But I feel like
Hmm.
that about Labyrinth or Neverending Story, and I don't know why it took me by surprise because there's several comics about Labyrinth, so why not do a Fire and Ice? But I feel like Fire and Ice was this extra niche movie, like people were talking
Hmm.
about heavy metal. No, it's like, yeah, but have you seen Fire and Ice? Like it's
Yeah.
got that same kind of feel. It's so badass. So I'm glad to see it come out in a comic book format. And I just want to know the story because I know that you have Bill Willingham is writing it, and
Hmm.
then you also have Leonardo Manco who's drawing it.
Yes. Yes.
And for you, because okay, and then the other thing is, if you haven't read it, I did leave a link in the description of the video where you can go and find it. But it is a prequel, or it sets up the events that happen in Fire and Ice. How did all this get started?
Well, I'm gonna take you back.
Take me
So we, yeah. So we were approached by a gentleman named Bob Freeman, who is helping us do this role playing game, which we're coming out with on August 8th. It will be launched Tuesday. It's
okay.
going to be a Kickstarter with Dynamite and Frazetta Girls, Bob Freeman, and Bob and I got talking about this role playing game, and he started asking me good questions. Why aren't you guys doing anything with Fire and Ice? This property, it's going to be 40 years since this came out. The last thing that was going on was the live action film with Robert Rodriguez that is no longer happening,
Yeah.
and it just really stayed stagnant. And I said, Bob, you're right. Like, we need to do something with this. So we talked with Nick at Dynamite, and we said, well, let's get something going with Fire and Ice. Let's bring a role playing game. Let's bring a comic series. And he was totally on board and really excited about it. And I had a lot to pull from because my grandfather was such a fan of his own movie. He loved Fire and Ice, and we watched it together quite often. And I had heard him just he loved the movie, but there were some things, loose ends in his opinion, with storytelling, and they ran out of money, and Bakshi said it as well. It was a beautiful film, but there wasn't a great plot and a lot of character development. I mean, the questions of, like, why is Tigra King Jarl's daughter? Why is Necron so angry? What's going on? Like, we needed a little bit of a, not an origin story, but a backstory. So we talked about this internally, and then we got to this place of saying, well, who's going to do this? Because this is a really tough job to do as a writer and an artist, because the you don't want to, what I don't want to do is reinvent the wheel with Fire and Ice. It is a cult classic. Fans love it the way it is. So
Hmm.
we didn't want to rewrite the movie. We wanted to just add to it. And a lot of the a lot of the decisions were made based on what Frazetta would have wanted. And with Bill, it's Bill Willingham. I mean, he did such an incredible job with Fables. And really, with Bill Willingham, it was like
People forget about Shadow Pack too. Like, I love Shadow Pack. That's a very underrated series by Bill Willingham.
I have not read it, but anything, I have faith. I have so much faith in Bill Willingham now that anything he touches is going to turn to gold. And Leonardo Manco, I mean, same thing. Same thing. It was like, who do we get as an artist that's it's that stands on their own 2 feet. They're very established, but they
Mhm.
also can do like a little bit of an homage to Frazetta. And I looked at Manco's work, and I saw very reminiscent style from like my grandfather's creepy interior work, the werewolf
Yeah.
story. I looked at Manco's art and I said, this reminds me of that interior comic art. And I don't say that very often. So it was a challenge to put the team together. But when we did it, it was like, okay, it's really about, like, I think it's like, you want to get people that are relevant and popular and everything. It's a business, but like, you also have to just trust your gut intuition on things and say, and I mean, with us, at least, it's like, we have to honor what Frazetta wanted. And that was my biggest goal. And for Dynamite to believe in us and give us that creative freedom and say, like, hey, you guys can kind of call the shots on this to an extent. It made me just like appreciate them as a company even more, because they were so willing to hear what my thoughts were about Frazetta's wants. So I feel really good about that, as a, like, putting this out, because it always has to be everything we do from now on. We've had some blunders, and even when my grandfather was alive, he put out comic series that he didn't really love. Some books like Jim Silky's novels, he wasn't like thrilled about them. The Danzig comic series, he didn't love them. So I don't feel too much pressure, knowing that my grandfather also had some slip ups with when it came to storytelling. But I just, now that he's not here, and now that this is in my control, that's my wishes, is to fulfill what he wished he would have gotten done in his lifetime.
There's so much like Nick, or I'm sorry, Josh just brought up a fun fact. James Gurney was a background artist for Fire and Ice. Absolutely. He's the guy
Yeah.
that did Dinotopia. But I was
Yep.
thinking, like, there's so much comic book background behind Fire and Ice, because you had Roy Thomas, Jerry Conway writing the script. And of course, a
Right.
lot of that kind of spun out of their run on Conan,
Right.
which your grandfather was so influential with. So it's almost like coming full circle with the movie. That's why I think a lot of people really like. I know the people in the comic book stores really loved Fire and Ice, but it's definitely one of those movies that not a lot of people talked about for some reason. At least when I was younger, it kind of became a cult classic later on. It was so good.
Yeah. Yeah. It didn't do well at the box office. And I remember, my grandpa was upset about that. I mean, and you read the criticism online, and it's pretty bleak with the reviews. And my grandpa, he read the reviews, and he was like, oh God. And he just blamed it on the fact that, again, he said the script was good. The characters were great, Necron and Tigra, and it just wasn't fully developed. And that was a lot because of, like I said, like budget, time
Mhm.
constraints, and it just wasn't, they did with what they had. But I think if, sorry, what's the tragedy of being at home? You have I don't know if you heard my German
No,
Shepherd.
you're,
He's
you're good.
okay,
You're
good.
good.
Okay, good. I'm like looking, I'm like, whoa, okay, he's going crazy. But
Mhm.
yeah, so I think it was just, I mean, I think like everything Frazetta touches, it's always like a little bit of ahead of its time too. And
Mhm.
now it's starting to become, I mean, people that see it now, they're like, wait, this was made in 1983. This is so
Yeah,
ahead of its
exactly.
time.
Absolutely. I think had it been done now, I think it definitely would have been one of those HBO limited series adapted, with a couple of
Yeah,
maybe limited series, but then more seasons. But I
yeah,
think it was definitely way ahead of its time, because
yeah.
even circulation of the VHS kind of went out of print for a while. But it's really cool to see it kind of come full circle, and then reintroducing a whole new generation to this particular. Because I know it does suck to see something, that you put so much work into, and get destroyed out there by reviewers and of course the box office. So
Yeah,
it's really cool that it might get, another chance to live. And in a way, Frank's legacy lives on. So
absolutely. Yeah. I mean, as long as we just keep getting to like work with it, reinvent it a little bit, bring it to like the modern audiences. That's the goal. But it's like, again, we really want to keep the core Frazetta fan always in mind. And I think like with this book, that's what we're really targeting, like people that loved what Frazetta did with his artwork and love just pure Frazetta. That's what the kind of story we wanted to give Frazetta fans who have been following Frazetta's journey since they were little kids and teenagers. And you know, so far we've gotten that response to where it's like, okay, it's not just to bring in a new audience, it is to honor the OG original Frazetta fan that just loves it and can't get enough, and bring you into that world.
I love that. And okay, so once it was decided with Nick and everybody at Dynamite, the writing team and the artist, how far into the project are they? Are we talking, is this going to be a limited series, or is this going to be ongoing that will even eventually map out to the movie, or is that not where you all are in the thought process as to how this is going to come together?
Yeah, so right now it's a limited series, but we're most likely going to do spin-offs, one shots. We don't have a complete executed plan so that we can speak of yet in public, but we're really excited about it because the way, again, like Bill Willingham set it up, there's now so much potential. I mean, he's not only bringing us back into Tigra's origins and Queen Juliana and her son Kael'din that we didn't know of before, but he's also bringing in like new tribes and just all these different kinds of worlds. And you know, he was what a viewer brought up before. Sorry, I didn't get his name, but James Gurney's backgrounds. I mean, they were incredible. Yeah. And the way that you can just make these stories up from just the ice caves that he made and the landscapes. I mean, it's endless. And when you have someone that's truly creative and the juices don't stop flowing, I mean, I think this will go on for quite a while, but we wanted to start with 6. We're going to have 6 issues of the prequel series. The role-playing game is set up as a sequel to the movie, but it's not to say that we won't have also like a sequel issue, a series coming from Fire and Ice. We're just going to keep building this world because it's been 40 years. Fire and Ice is loved by many people. It's Frazetta's, 40. I know, I feel old. I'm like, oh God, it's starting to hit me now. But it's Frazetta's strongest IP. It was a movie. It was all of the characters really were developed around Frazetta characters that came before it. I mean, you can see Tigra's influence from Catgirl, Deja Thoris, and all of the Cleopatra, like what you have in the background here. I mean, they all they're the essence of a Frazetta girl. It's a Frazetta girl. So I just think it's really cool to be able to have this opportunity to do this with such a strong property.
You mentioned Frazetta Girls. You co-founded that. What exactly is that for people that don't know?
So Frazetta Girls is a legacy brand. It is our online shop, FrazettaGirls.com. It was founded by my mother and I in 2013. And we decided to get into a Frazetta business because we wanted to honor my grandfather. I was at a point in my career. I had a very new career, fresh out of college. I was working as a production coordinator. I wanted to get into a creative field. Now, I genuinely did not know the impact that my grandpa had on the creative world before all of this. Like, when my grandfather was alive, he was grandpa to me. He wasn't the godfather of fantasy art. Yes, his art was everywhere, but it was like an afterthought. It was a grandpa first, and the paintings, you kind of just didn't put it together because he didn't really talk about them. We'd watch movies together and play, and he'd take photographs, and he was just a really present person, and he didn't boast about himself to his grandkids. So after he passed away and the legal battle started between the family, I started getting an idea of what an impact my grandfather made. When I saw, Conan the Destroyer sold for $1 million. I was like, wait, his $1 million. I'm like, oh my God. But genuinely, I had no idea. So it was after a few years he had passed away. He was like a second father to me. And my mom came to me and she said, the rights we're dividing everything now as a family. And I want to start a business to honor my father. Would you join me and we'll start a business? And I said, okay. So our business plan, we didn't really have a business plan, but we went to a comic convention. It was my first comic convention I ever attended. It was in Miami, Florida.
Okay.
And my mom and we brought some signature shirts. We put the red Frazetta signature shirt in the front.
Stands out. That stands out.
That was my mom. It was a good idea. And we had the Robert Rodriguez Presents Frazetta banner in the back, because at this time Rodriguez was promoting the live action remake. He was buying original art. He was touring original art, and he was just really involved with the legacy and kind of like showing me the potential that we had with this brand, with this artwork of what we could do. And it was really inspiring to me. And I'm like, okay, so there's a lot that can be done here, and this is a very creative field. So, and I get to honor my grandfather. I'm a very nostalgic person, so it's a really beautiful match that was made. And I still think about it, and it's very odd to me that I'm doing this business. It's very odd that this like full circled, and I was sitting in the museum when I was a little girl and just thinking nothing of it, and then now here I am. So yeah, we started going to comic conventions and meeting fans, and then slowly it developed into an e-commerce website. We were really focused on social media presence, and we just kept building that way. And now we've gotten really strongly into merchandising, thanks to my partner Joe. And we keep developing. And now we launched an action figure line, Frazetta Icon Collectibles. We're going to make statues and books and everything else that Frazetta fans have been asking for a long time. It's just that we take an approach of an organic grow, and we don't have investors. So it's been
that's awesome.
Yeah. So it's a slow process. So I'm like, you give us time, guys. I promise. Stick with us, and we'll make you happy eventually.
So, I ran across Frazetta Girls a couple of years ago because I wanted to get. I was looking up Frazetta prints. I'm like, I want something on top of my fireplace.
Yeah.
And my wife and I kept going back as to what belongs there, but I kept going back to Frazetta prints. I was like, this is the one. She's like, well, what about flowers? And I'm like, oh, I like flowers too. But look how badass Conan looks fighting this snake. How awesome would that be?
Your wife's cool that she agreed even to let you have a Frazetta, because I can't tell you how many fans I come across, and they're like, my wife won't let me hang it in my house. I'm like, what? That's terrible. She get at least one wall dedicated to you.
I have an entire basement, so she's cool with that. It was just it was upstairs.
So your man cave.
Yeah, I was like, this is arts. Like it's fantasy. It's artsy enough. I think it would work.
It's fine art. Come on, this should be in the. This should be in the European museum. It should be at the MoMA. Anywhere there's a fine art, Frazetta can fit in just fine.
But that's how I stumbled upon the website, was looking for prints, and I noticed that it was, Frazetta Girls, what's this about? And that's when I did a little bit of research and came across the work that you were doing. Now, it doesn't.
Some people take it really literally, like with Frazetta Girls. They're like, what does that mean? And it's like, with the name, why we came up with that name, it's like, we're his girls. It's Frazetta Girls, and it's also it's not as relevant today to call a grown woman a girl, but in the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, he referred to his women as his Frazetta Girls. So we were like, it's a double entendre. It's fun. It's memorable. And it's a little tip of the hat to the term that he coined so long ago.
I like that.
To throw that in there. Thank you.
Absolutely. And it doesn't stop there, because there are projects that you're constantly working on that he was, behind. Like, especially we were just talking about the Taschen book, the Frazetta book, that's absolutely stunning. But even a little bit of Vampirella, right?
Oh yeah. So Vampirella, so my grandfather did not design that costume. People think that he designed it, but it's actually Trina Robbins. But James Warren wanted my grandfather to draw her. My grandpa had other I think my grandpa wanted her as a, I think they wanted her as a blonde, and my grandpa said no. It went through many stages.
Okay.
But yeah, so my grandfather did the iconic Vampirella #1, but he hated the costume, which I disagree with. I love Vampirella's costume. I think it's great. But my grandpa
He didn't like it, huh?
he hated it so much that when he got Vampirella #1 back, because he always got his original art back, he painted off the costume and then he sold her nude and completely ruined the value of the original art. I'm like, why would you do that? But you couldn't tell Frazetta not to do what he wanted to do. It was his art after all. But yeah, so all these years later, after my grandpa illustrated some iconic Vampirella covers and did various inks drawings of her, I'm working on a series now for Dynamite. It's called Vampirella Dead Flowers, and I'm co-writing it with Bob Freeman, who I mentioned earlier, who really got this whole Fire and Ice thing reignited by simply sending me a message on Twitter, and we started a friendship there. And so we're co-writing it together. I'm doing some covers for it. We have Alberto Locatelli doing the interiors, and Matt Idelson, the editor at Dynamite, he found Alberto, and it was just like again like that perfect pairing coming together, because with Alberto's artwork and interpreting the writing, it was perfect. We didn't have to do any edits where we were like, no, we don't really feel like that's the right style for this panel. It was all just perfect, where Bob and I were like, wow, that was easy. So I have to thank Matt for making it such like as my first project, as my first series. It's like this, it's been very easy. So now I think I'm a little delusional of how it all works.
And how okay, so your role in that is a little more hands-on than what Fire and Ice is. So how does that work then with something like Fire and Ice? Do you oversee the script and you're like, yeah, this is good. This is exactly how my grandfather would have handled this, or because we are talking about Frazetta characters.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, we were, again, like Dynamite. I have to again thank them, and I'm gonna probably annoy Nick with how much I thank him, because but I really can't thank them enough for letting us be involved with every step of this project. I mean, from picking the writer to the artist to the script. I mean, just going over everything. Again, with Bill, he's just so damn good that we didn't have to do a lot of back and forth. It was just like, oh, I didn't have to edit what the editor was editing. It was just, this is great. I love it. He knows the direction I wanted. And, a lot of I think the process of why it went so smoothly too, is because when we put our team together and we did initial calls and emails, everyone was very engaged and very open to listening, and really listening to what our expectations were. So it was like such again, a beautiful process, because we felt heard and respected, and then it all worked out because everyone was on the same page with that.
That's I think that's a good relationship to have with the publisher and then the creative team too. And I just
Definitely.
right before this meeting, so I read the first issue of Fire and Ice twice, and I finished it right before I joined you. I just can't. I could not get over how good this. I love this paint, and I like Bill Willingham. Like Fables is one of my favorite series, but the painted look that Leonardo Manco is bringing here to this book, man, it's killer. There's a lot of like. You're right. Like you mentioned, Frazetta's creepy, right? There's a lot of that. There's a little bit of Joe Kubert in there with some of the characters. Oh my gosh, it's just solid, and the colors just look so good.
Well, and you do have to keep going back to it, because it's like he just puts so much detail and care into every single panel, where it's like, oh, I didn't see that little frog over in the corner. I didn't see that monkey over in the on the limb over there. Or and again, I think that's just him having the utmost like honor with Frazetta, and of course doing it as his own, on his own, as an artist who's very legendary. But that's what my grandfather did. You'd look at the art, and then there would be so many times where you go back and you'd be like, I never caught that before, or oh, I never noticed that before. Like there's one painting, Ghoul Queen. And because my grandfather was so good at the composition and bringing your eye to where it needed to go, I completely always miss this dead girl laying at the feet of the Ghoul Queen, who looks like it could be Ghoul Queen's sister, and like just and then it gets your imagination going, and you're like, oh, like what's actually going on here with this dead girl laying, and then these like primitive creatures, like what are they doing? But it's just like the focal point is so strong that you really have to dive in, and that's like what Leonardo Manco does with all of his artwork in these panels. Your eye goes straight to something, but then if you take the time, you're like, oh my gosh, like it's like a dance with your eyes. It's a really beautiful composition. And I know he really cares about that. And that's why, this is going to be bi-monthly. And it's because we want to take our time. We don't want to rush anything, because it's important to let Leonardo do his process, and to get artwork like that at that kind of level, it takes time. So it's like, that's something we're not going to compromise.
I got you. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about how you got into this particular world of comics and graphic novels. Like, was that something as a kid that you always were curious about, or was it just in you because who your grandfather was?
I think it's more of a it's something that I'm pulling out of me now. We all have times where we can lose that inner child, and then we go back to it. We find it again and say, oh yeah, this is great. I mean, when I grew up, I grew up on Nickelodeon, Goosebumps. I mean, those were all. Are You Afraid of the Dark? And Barbie, like I mentioned before we went live. So
Yeah.
I was always an imaginative kid, but I mean, getting to the point of feeling confident enough to release titles that are, they're Frazetta first and foremost, but getting behind that and putting our name, Frazetta Girls. It's like you have to just have a lot of courage to do it, and with Vampirella, that was more Nick and his team kind of pushing me and saying, hey, we would like you to do this. And then of course my first instinct is to go, no, I'm not a writer, I'm not an artist, because I'm not. I mean, I'm not. Like I have to always remember, I have to keep things in perspective, and it's like people dedicate their lives to being writers and to being artists, and my grandpa was like top Leonardo Manco. That's all he does. I mean, when I watch artists who are devoted to the craft, that's all they do, and that's why they become masters. And I respect that. But I dabble in it because it's for my personal reasons, because I really wanted to, when I first started drawing, it was really just to understand how good my grandpa was. And when I started doing it, like I was like, I got a different kind of perspective for artists, and going, wow, like how labor intensive it is. And I feel like, personally, I'm a hands-on learner, so I have to do things to understand things. And so that's really why I got into art. And now it's just, then when you start going, like I said, it's just earlier, like the creative juices keep flowing, and then more ideas are coming, and you just feel really inspired. So now that we've opened the gates, like it's just the floods are coming, and it's not gonna stop. It's just the momentum's just gonna keep going in terms of Frazetta titles, comics, and then my personal ones. Hopefully, we'll see.
No, I think it's a great plan. I think your grandfather would be proud of you carrying on his legacy and the name. You mentioned something that I wanted to come back to when branding the Frazetta girls. What was there backlash? Did you hear backlash, like from other women mainly, that have a problem with the term girls being used?
I mean, there's a comment once in a while online that I'll see, and I'm like, I don't even try to defend it anymore, because now I'm to the point, you first get on social media and you think you have to respond to every single thing and defend it. And then you realize, like, most of the time you're getting trolled, and you don't want to give that energy back. But once in a while, but I think people can respect, especially like I said, Frazetta's core fan group. They can respect that it's it's of the time, and that's all we're doing. We're paying homage to when Frazetta was at his height in his career, and again, it's like reminiscent of the times. That's what that's how women were referred to, as we were girls, and it's not to be really overthought. So most people are very respectful and don't do much of a fuss. I mean, I get the question a lot of like sexism with Frazetta, and I always just kind of roll my eyes, because it's you don't really know his catalog of artwork to even say that. You're not really a true fan, because if you look at his catalog of art, you'll see that men wore no clothes as well. They had no pants on. He favored the gluteus maximus of men, women, animals, anything that he could draw anatomy on. It was always like that's what the point of Frazetta was. It wasn't to just have a scantily clad woman. It was just to show the anatomy, and to show the anatomy in full force was to have less clothes on, so you could get all of the muscles seen and the action. So again, I think it's just people understand. They understand that it was of the time, and we don't have to modernize everything to make everyone's feelings feel good. It is what it is.
I got you. No, he was one of my favorites. He was one of my favorites. And when, he passed away, oh my goodness, it's been over 10 years, right? 2010.
Yep. I know. It's crazy.
I mean,
Time's going by quick.
It really, it took the whole, not just comic book people. I mean, there were people that don't read comics or are into the geeky realm of like Fire and Ice that knew the name Frank Frazetta.
Definitely. I mean,
Americana.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, he just touched so many different like people. It's like that's the beauty of having great art, is it brings everyone of all walks of lives together because of the common love for Frazetta. I mean, you have like intense like metalheads. You have you have like the top film directors like James Cameron and who absolutely love Frazetta. And then you have someone who works on a farm who's just like, this is great art. I love it. It's so inspiring. So it's a really beautiful thing that he can just go across, like transcend time and people and all walks of life because of his greatness and his, I mean, I've definitely become more of a fan doing this business and now getting into the comics, and again, just like immersing myself into his artwork. I was always a fan of my grandfather because he's my grandfather, but now I'm like a true Frazetta fan, where it's like you see other people's art, and it's amazing. There's many artists now that I really love, but he just had something that was like magical about him. Like, I mean, and I know I'm biased, I'm his granddaughter, but like I see it and I'm like, all right, there was something flowing through him that he didn't even know how to explain it. But I mean, his talent from age 3, I mean, he really never had a formal training in art. I mean, he'd go to some classes on the weekends, but it was just something. And he was like, it's a higher power. It was a gift given to me. And he worked at it. He worked at it really hard. But I've had this debates with people where we talk about it, and it's like, no, and anyone can get to that level with work. And I'm like, I don't think so. I really don't. It was something that was given to him, maybe from a past life. I don't know. But he just had this ability to bring such originality to the world, and with such ease. And again, he's just, I say he's the godfather of fantasy art. I use the term the GOAT, greatest of all time. Yeah. And that's not because he's my grandfather. It's just because I'm like, wow, I'm seeing what all of his passionate fans see finally. And it's really incredible what he did.
And if you look at how many artists and writers and movie makers, like music, like his art inspired. And then those people went on to inspire other generations too. It's always a case of art inspiring art, and I love it. But I love that most of my favorite artists growing up, especially in the realm of fantasy or even Swamp Thing, any introduction I ever saw was like, oh yes, I was a big Frazetta fan, or I got a lot of inspiration from Frazetta, whether it's Mike Mignola or Bernie Wrightson, or just people that, or even people that I had no idea were inspired by Frank Frazetta's artwork, because their art style is so different. Like, really surprised me. He really was one of the greatest artists, and not. I don't want to say just fantasy though, because he did dabbed in a lot of different things. So
yeah, I mean, his movie posters were great. I mean, his comics were incredible. When he worked with Little Abner, I mean, he was really, really great. And you know, he took all his inspiration from the greats that came before him: Hal Foster,
yeah,
Joseph Clement Cole. I mean, one of the biggest mentors that doesn't get talked about enough, and we've highlighted him more on our blog, and I try to talk about him a lot. But his dear friend Roy Krenkel. Roy Krenkel was an incredible artist and worked a lot for Ace, Edgar Rice Burroughs.
mm-hmm.
And Roy Krenkel was the one who was introducing my grandfather to Norman Lindsay's artwork and Norman Rockwell, and showing Frank, like, hey, these guys you got to keep your eyes on, and open my grandfather up to more legendary artists that he could kind of pull from, because that is the point of art. It's like, take everything that you're inspired by, put it in a blender, and then make it your own, and then let that keep happening from generation to generation, day to day. So you know, it's always going to be like that. My another huge inspiration for my grandpa was Disney. I mean, Fantasia, the movie Fantasia. If you watch Fantasia, that came out in 1933. And predates Frazetta by a long shot, and you'll see so much Frazetta in that movie, where he pulled from this,
Night
he
on
pulled
Bald
from that.
Mountain.
Oh God, I mean, Death Dealer was 100% influenced from that, and even the original King Kong. I mean, I see so much of the foliage and everything in that film, and I'm like, okay, my grandpa swiped there. Again, not swiping, but like, he pulled from it. He saw it. It really stuck with him. And he was a guy that he would just watch things that he loved so much over and over and over again. I don't know if that's like anxiety. My partner Joe says that I like to rewatch things over and over again because it's like a coping mechanism.
I've heard that is a coping mechanism by people that suffer from anxiety.
Probably,
My wife does it. My wife has 5 movies she goes back to. Yes.
Yeah. So I think my grandpa was actually, I think he was pretty anxious, and I think that was his like coping mechanism. Because I mean, we watched King Kong, Fantasia, Night of the Hunter, and sometimes Seventh Voyage of Sinbad, but like on repeat. Like those are
some
movies.
Great movies. Those are some great movies. It's my favorite.
He didn't want to watch anything else. I'm like, Grandpa, what about let's adventure. Let's watch some Lord of the Rings. Nope. I mean, he loved Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings, but it wasn't in the rotation. It wasn't in the anxiety rotation.
When was it that you found out? And then I promise I'm going to get to some really good questions in the chat right now. But this is something I'm curious about, because anybody that's always related or married to somebody that, you know, everybody sees as like this genius. Like, when did you learn that your grandfather was Frank Frazetta? Like, that name, and people were like, oh, it's your grandfather's Frank Frazetta. That's awesome. Like, when did you realize that?
So I had a glimpse once. I was in high school, and I was working at a restaurant, and the bartender who worked there, he brought it up. He goes, your grandfather's Frank Frazetta? And I was like, yeah. And he goes, oh my God. And he like started like getting like really emotional, and he goes,
Whoa.
he's like, can you bring this comic to your grandfather when you go see him this summer and have him sign it? And I was like, sure. So I brought it, and this was the first fight my grandma and I ever gotten into. I brought the comic in, and I said, Grandma, I'm going to have Grandpa sign this comic. And she goes, for who? And I said, for my friend. He's a bartender and at the restaurant I work at. And she's like, no, it's $200. And I was like, what? I'm like, I'm not paying you $200. I'm like, I'm going to have Grandpa sign the comic. And you know, she had to be very protective in defense of my grandma, because a lot of people had taken advantage of her at this time, right. And my grandpa. So in hindsight, I understand, but at 16 years old, this made no sense to me, and I was completely taken back. So my grandpa, he looked at me up from they had a sunken living room, and he goes, come around to the studio, come back. So I go around to the studio, and he goes, she's nuts. Let me sign this for you. Take it back to your friend. Don't worry about it. She's crazy. And, again, that was my grandpa just being cool and not caring. And he traded art for cameras. He was just a really cool, down to earth guy. But again, playing devil's advocate for my grandma, if it wasn't for her, my grandpa probably would have lived in a shack and, had a dollar to his name, because he just would give everything away, because that's just the kind of guy he was. So he would have been taken advantage of. So that was the first glimpse. But again, I kind of didn't think anything of it. I was in my teenage years thinking about my boyfriends and at my, very self-involved. And so it was after then when my grandmother passed away and the feud started with the family, and the, prices of original art started coming up. And I was like, wait, how much does he, what? And then when he passed away, that's when I really knew, when it was like, you have an article from the New York Times being written about him, and you see all these things coming out where people are just like talking about how he was such an incredible artist and what he did for so many people. And I do kick myself in the butt, because if I would have known, I would have gotten more video of my grandfather. I also would have got some original art. I'd be like, hey, Grandpa, let's talk about that art. But I just didn't think of it like that. And it kept it very, I think, it's just a very wholesome experience I got to have with my grandfather, rather than thinking, oh, this person's a famous person. And I'm glad it worked out that way. And I've had to work for what I have instead.
I think that's wonderful, because I think and it sounds to me that he was pretty humble about everything that he had, and didn't boast about, like, I'm Frank Frazetta, where's my free drink?
No,
I don't know if anybody really does that or not, but I think that's wonderful. Oh,
for sure. But no, he was very humble, and he was very frugal. I've told this story quite a bit, but he had I think $7,000 cash in his pocket, and this was when he moved to Florida,
Mm-hmm.
and that was a lot of money, cash, to have in your pocket. And we went over to Hudson's, the little grocery store, and my mom wanted him to buy some Klondike bars, and he's like, $7? No. He's like, that's a ripoff, and he wouldn't spend $7. So that's the Great Depression. That really was in his blood, where he really couldn't shake that. I mean, he was just he never paid a bill in his life, so he really didn't have a concept of money. He did see the Conan the Destroyer painting sell for $1 million, and it wasn't about him selling it for $1 million because he got the money. It was about just breaking a record, where he was like, see, I am who I think I am, just a proud internal moment. But it was never about oh, what am I going to do with that $1 million? I mean, he wouldn't even buy a $7 pack of ice cream bars. So
that says a lot about him, though, and
a lot.
I think that's great. So I'm going to get to some questions in the chat, but before I do, how many issues were you all planning for Fire and Ice, this round of Fire and Ice?
6.
So 6 issues.
Sadly,
and I assume
when it ended, I was like, no, more. We need more.
Well, good. We need more is a good attitude. Yeah. That first issue was amazing. I cannot wait to see the whole thing and read the whole thing. It took me back to that movie, which is good, which is what you want to do. And
definitely,
I can't wait to see what I assume Nick already has plans for a collected edition of this particular collection, because it's going to look gorgeous.
Sick, yeah.
In a big oversized hardcover format, Nick.
Yeah.
But we'll talk about that later. So let me get to some questions in the chat. I'm going to try to hit up some, because there were some really good ones in here. Let's see. Oh, I wanted to go back to this one. But okay, I'll find it here in a second. Sarah, are we getting any new Frazetta titles with Opus Comics after Dawn Attack and Mothman and Death Dealer?
Great question. So yes, we're getting a one-shot in October called Beyond the Grave, based off his Beyond the Grave painting. It will be a horror issue, which I'm really excited about. And then we are putting out another Death Dealer series. It's Death Dealer 2099. I've had a lot of clapping and also a lot of thumbs down, and it's about 50-50 from the reactions. But I have to say, I'm very honest about my opinion about the series that we put out. And I thought I was going to really hate Death Dealer 2099. Just being
Okay.
honest, I was like, I don't know about this. But I'm open-minded. I'm like, okay, it's about the fans. It's not all about me and what I wish to come to fruition. And I read the outline and I talked to the artist. I've seen the artist's work and it's actually really great. I'm like, this is actually really cool. This is a series I would want to read. I'm already emotionally invested in it. So that's what we're working on right now, and we'll see how that goes and where we're going to go with continuing with Opus. Hopefully, everything will be smooth sailing from here on out, and we'll keep putting out cool titles.
Death Dealer 2090. I'm curious about that one.
Yeah.
If sales are well, could it become an ongoing series? I need a background story on that lizard in the swamp. Yeah, I don't know
so we're talking about Fire and Ice, right?
Yeah, with something like that, how does that work? Like, if sales are so good, or is it like if the creative team wants to continue and Nick's like gives the green light and then you give the green light, or like how would I am curious, how would something like that work?
I mean, personally, I never want to do anything just to push it because sales are good. I think that's how, like, just speaking on like series that I love. Like I was talking to my friend about the series Peaky Blinders, for instance, and I love Peaky Blinders, but then season 5 and 6 were tragic, and I'm like, don't ruin it. So
I
I
haven't even
also
seen
have to
6.
be, yeah, don't.
Oh,
So it's disappointing, and then you kind of are left with that feeling of like, why did they keep going? Like, just stop when don't if you don't have any more to write of, don't do it. So as long as we have, I think it's going to be more based on the creative team where we feel like, oh, we can expand here. I do think, Frazetta, it's great for world building because there is so much that's Jeff. Hi, Jeff. There's so much to cover with Frazetta that I don't think we're going to really run out of things to write about. But yeah, so I hope that answers the question.
okay, got it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and J-Man was saying that the Kickstarter game will be available on Kickstarter August 8th. So that is
Yes.
right around the corner.
Yes. It's like everything's just coming at once.
Get ready to do more interviews. How do we follow her work and other in the company's work? And yeah.
So all social media at Frazetta Girls, and then my personal work, I'll put it up on at Sara Frazetta. I'm on most social media, even Threads. I don't even actually I haven't been on in a week, but I think we all went on and then we're like, and then like Twitter rebranded and it's like horrible. And I won't even go to it now because I'm so used to seeing the blue little bird. Now I see the black X and I'm like, what is this? What is this app? Anyway, but I'm on, despite my opinions about the rebranding, you can find me there.
Okay. Sarah,
Oh,
is
that's
only
so
a
nice,
question you
Michael.
can answer. I can't answer this one. How are you? So awesome.
I don't know. I don't think I am, but thank you, Michael.
So humble. You must have gotten that from your grandfather. Do you have a favorite art piece from your grandfather's collection? Yeah. Did you?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I do. I have it kind of rotates like on my mood of the day.
Mm-hmm.
But Egyptian Queen's always been at the top. And I remember Egyptian Queen. Egyptian Queen was on the cover of Eerie magazine. And he, of course, repainted it like he did with so many. But I just remember as a child really being captivated by that painting because of the marble column and the headdress and the outfit. And it was just such a again like a fine art piece where I was like, man, I was like, Grandpa did this. Like he was. For context, my grandpa was a little bit. He was in poor health when I was born, so it wasn't like this like vibrant, masculine, like cool guy, like hitting golf balls and swinging baseball bats. He was more of like in that stage of like just being grandpa, watching movies, playing video games, doing what he could do. So I kind of always looked at that painting and go, how did he do that? That's incredible. I don't know that version of grandpa. And then my other one is Golden Girl. Golden Girl was done in the 50s. It's a watercolor, and it's just this beautiful blonde woman who is very strong and powerful. And she has these panthers and wolves in the back of her. And there's like a stork and a little frog. And it's just like this this land of like utopia of like, if I could have envisioned the perfect world of like how I would want to live, it would be Golden Girl. Like that would I mean, she's like in like probably in Switzerland or somewhere really beautiful. And if I could pick how I looked and how I lived, it would be Golden Girl.
I'm not familiar with that one. Egyptian Queen, I know
It's,
because of the magazine, but I don't remember that one. And I've looked up a lot of stuff, a lot of prints.
You'll have to look up Golden Girl, and you'll say, "Okay, I get it. I get why you want to live
Okay,
like that."
I'll check it out. This is such a good question because I'm sure this happens, right? Since I'm a young baby, which bar claims to be? I'm not sure. It's the internet. Everybody lies. And I'm not familiar with Frank Frazetta's work. Where would you say is the best place to start? I'm curious what your answer. I know for me, being a comic book guy, I know where I would go, but how about you? When people approach you with this question, like anybody, when you go to conventions and they see the Frazetta thing, they're like, "Hey, that name looks familiar, but what has he done? What do you suggest I check out?"
So if you can find Painting with Fire, that was the documentary that was made on him, that's where I would suggest you go. Again, I'm a visual learner, so that really stuck with me. Lance Laspina, he's the filmmaker. He's working on re-releasing that, so that should be more accessible soon. And we are working on a documentary, very, very beginning stages in pre-production right now. And we hope to have a documentary that covers his life, but it also covers his legacy, and it's a very inspiring piece on like we talked about earlier, all of the people that he influenced in that are just enormous now and have their own legacies, and how it all ties together. And it'll be just a really great inspirational piece. That does not have a date of release yet. It might be a while. And another place is our website. Not to just plug our website, but we have a great blog section on FrazettaGirls.com. And we've had a lot of great contributors to the blog. Arnie Fenner, who did some of the greatest Frazetta books, Icon, Retrospective, Testament, and Arnie's contributed blogs. Stephen Ringenberg, who actually has some audio interviews of my grandfather and did a lot of interviews in various magazines over the years. So we have a great guy named Paul who's writing about the repaints of Frazetta. So you can really go on and get like this, some articles that I've poorly written, but back like all the way back to his childhood. So you can get just like glimpses of like him as a person and then his career. And we have quite it's a growing blog. So we try to add something every bi-weekly. So I'd say those are good places to start. And then of course social media, we're always posting and educating. And that was a long answer. Sorry.
No, you're the right person to ask. I would suggest some Fire and Ice comics with
Fire and Ice comic.
That's a good. I'm a collected editions guy though, but oh my gosh, I don't. It's really difficult to choose where because I love his Warren covers, like anything from Eerie or Creepy Magazine. I mean, they're just iconic. And then he also did some, not just for those and Vampirella, but what was it called? Blazing Battle?
Blazing Combat.
Yes, Blazing Combat. Those were killer.
Oh God, yeah,
those were so good.
I wish he did more war art. It was like insane, like his tanks, and he loved airplanes, so it makes sense that he was just so good at illustrating an airplane and the setting of war. But yeah, he could do anything. He was that good. It's kind of annoying that he could do anything. I joke with him about that. I'm like, what? Where did this all come from?
There's a great issue of the original Vampirella where a man is slowly driven insane by the painting Egyptian Queen. It's that good.
I gotta get that issue. Yeah.
Have you seen Laura Martin's tribute to Egyptian Queen with Hot Fuzz? I don't think I have. Now I need to check that out.
I want to be careful with what I say, but I think if it's like the really busty version of Egyptian Queen, maybe. I've seen some great tributes of Egyptian Queen. I saw one. There was like I think there was a Donald Duck Egyptian Queen. It was like a Disney crossover.
I've seen that one. That one's awesome.
Yeah, that one's really cool. I love that.
Fun fact for Sarah, It's been 54 years since Vampirella 1, and it's been 59 years since Interior Comic Art. Super excited for Sarah's Vampirella. That's awesome.
Jeff's always coming with the fun facts. I love it. Thank you, Jeff. Yeah,
And
he teaches me my history.
and that one just came out, right, in July. The Vampirella book, the first issue.
My Vampirella is in October.
October.
That
Okay,
comes out.
sorry.
Yeah. I think, or September. Fire and Ice has just been consuming me so much lately. I'll get my my facts right about my own series very soon.
What did Frazetta think of his contemporaries like Wally Wood?
Yeah, he thought Wally Wood was very talented. I mean, he loved. I mean, he had a great. That was part of the Flegel gang. So the Flegel gang: Al Williamson, Roy Krinkle. Oh gosh, why am I forgetting his name? Oh no. Angelo Torres. Dear God, I love you, Angelo. I'm so sorry. But Angelo Torres, Wally Wood, they worked together. They worked together and helped each other, and were all very supportive of each other's artwork. And my grandpa really lost touch, unfortunately, with them when he moved out to Pennsylvania, left Brooklyn, and he didn't have that community, that camaraderie that he had with when he lived in the city. But no, he was very respectful of his contemporaries, and he didn't like when he started getting compared to like Boris Vallejo and Jeffrey Catherine Jones, because people started, he was a competitive guy. He was a sports guy. That's what drove him, was competition. And when someone would say, "Oh, we can see that you're inspired by Boris Vallejo," and he's like, "No. He was inspired by me." So he would always make it a point to. So, but he was very, again, anyone that he like worked with, collaborated with early on, very respectful.
See, it's Vampirella 66, issue 66. The story is called Picture Complete.
I'm writing that down. I'm actually taking a screenshot of that. Hold on, get that up, because
Absolutely.
that's awesome.
I got you. Okay. Did he have a piece he was especially proud of? Yeah, since your grandpa was a really humble guy, was there a piece that he was like, "That's Frank Frazetta, baby. That's the one"?
So for the record, he was humble with money and like fame, but he wasn't that humble with his art. He knew he was good. Like he knew he was really good. He was like, "Oh, this is great." But his Death Dealer one was up there. I mean, and then his work for Buck Rogers. It was Weird Science Fantasy number 29. And it turned into that because it was denied by Buck Rogers for being too violent, which is a whole nother story. But he loved that piece. He was a master inker. He knew it, and he held on to that piece until, it was in his collection when he passed away. And the other piece would probably be Egyptian Queen and Catgirl. Catgirl, he always talked about Catgirl being one of his favorites. Catgirl, and he's right. Catgirl is, I don't know. The Egyptian Queen is very beautiful too, but Catgirl, when I look at Catgirl, I'm like, yeah, that was the sexiest girl. I get it. I get why that was one of his favorites. I think he wished he could just take Catgirl and like make her into a real person. He couldn't believe that he had accomplished that on a canvas, and he was like, if I could only just, no offense, Grandma, but if only I could just take Catgirl and make her like the movie Weird Science. I think that was like his ultimate fantasy.
No offense, Grandma, is a great way to start that sentence.
Yeah. You were second, Grandma. You were the other beautiful Frazetta girl, but Catgirl was number one.
This is true, because I think about this too, because I said, you have no idea how much he inspired and keeps on inspiring people until you start talking to people. Right. So we mentioned, music and comics and paintings and just all these people we didn't know he had even inspired. But I remember, oh my gosh, Mark Taylor, the designer of He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, the toys, that's what he went for. He was like, oh, yeah, they came up to me and they were like, hey, put a paint, design some characters for this toy line. And he tapped into Frazetta, like in a documentary. He passed away just, I think, earlier this year. But in a documentary I watched, he was talking about how he just wanted to capture that Frazetta in his paintings for the Masters of the Universe. And sure enough, the whole freaking line is built around this inspiration that, you know, your grandfather gave him because of Death Dealer, because he was a fan of that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's incredible. I know how much of an inspiration he was to Masters of the Universe. He didn't personally ever say anything to me, but that's, like I said, he was so in his own world that it didn't mean that he didn't know what it was or have respect for it, but he was just very hyper focused on his 5 movies and the Frazetta world.
His 5 movies, I love it. I pre-ordered the Dark Wolf figure. Will there be other figures?
Well, thank you for pre-ordering. I am so excited to show you guys the articulation. We saw that video last night, which is insane. Dark Wolf's gonna be able to kick some major ass. But yes, there will be other figures. The Frazetta Icon Collectibles, that's our line, and there's going to be many figures to come. So stay tuned.
So there you have it.
Yes.
From the lady that runs the website. you're gonna have more Frazetta. from the Frazetta girl. I didn't want to just say Frazetta girl because then I
like the lady. I've been getting called lady. Like I have a couple younger friends who help me with things that I met, and then they refer to me as the lady, and I'm like, oh no. That's when you know you're in your mid-30s and you start getting called lady.
No, don't get me wrong. I was just being respectful. It's the Kentucky in me. I
love it. I'm messing with you. It's funny.
Hello, Sarah. Fire and Ice 1 looks great, and the panel art is maybe the best in any current Dynamite comic. It's really good.
No, man, I agree. I mean, like, not to say anything about Dynamite's other titles. They're all great, but Manco's my favorite right now. So
yeah, you guys chose the right guy for this. I'm sure, and I'm sure it wasn't an easy choice too, because there's a lot of people, like I said, that were inspired by Frazetta. So, and a lot of those guys went on to do Conan comics too. And I mean,
the latest Conan's beautiful. The latest Conan, does Jim that wrote it, or no, sorry, Del Torre. What's his first name? Del Torre, who did the art for Conan. It's really great. It's beautiful.
Yeah, he was my pick for Conan. He did a backup story for Marvel Comics.
Mm-hmm.
But
Romo Del Torre. I think that's what it was. All these.
It's not Guillermo. No. Rob de la Torre.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, great art, great, beautiful art. I mean, it was really exciting to see those in the store together at the same time. Like Conan #1, Fire and Ice #1. I'm like, this is
Nick's
awesome.
on top of it. He knows Roberto de la Torre. Roberto drew the Unbreakable Red Sonja for us. That was a good choice. Yeah.
Yeah. See, Dynamite puts out like freaking great art. They know and Nick put out so many great suggestions with artists, with covers, and we got Bill Sienkiewicz on cover A. Yeah. I mean,
that's solid.
They have quite the lineup. Yeah.
Yeah, that's solid. So 6 issues and perhaps some spin-offs out of the Fire and Ice. And you got the board game that's coming out, that's exciting times for Fire and Ice. For anybody that grew up watching this stuff and nobody knew what you were talking about, like kids like me that went to school, it's like, if you like heavy metal, dude, you gotta see this. It's all drawn, hand drawn animation. Fire and Ice.
Yeah, God, talk about labor intensive. Whew. Yeah, that process, rotoscoping. Whew. I want to do that.
Sadly, it's a lost art, though. I don't know. We may come back to that one day.
I think so. We'll get so overwhelmed by like AI that we'll want to just have that like beautiful,
simpler
original feeling. Yeah, like, you know what? We can have all of this, but we'll appreciate the originality of hand drawn even that much more. And I think like just having like Frazetta original art, like seeing oil, it will be even more elevated and loved because of the masses of AI.
So I have one more question, and I'm curious about this. Is there any piece of art that you think could, since it's a Frazetta painting or a piece of or just art, that you think they can make a story out of, a comic out of?
I think they could make it out of every piece of art, to be honest with you. I mean, there might be like one, like, I always kind of like go at this painting. It's The Executioner. It's my least favorite Frazetta painting. There's not much of a story there besides he's an executioner. I think that one, my grandpa was just like kind of, not inspired. He was like, nah, just whatever. I mean, even Frank Frazetta has to have one that he's like, that's like, eh. But everything else, I would say, which is pretty good. I would say there could be a story. I mean, he didn't coin himself as he was not a writer, but he was certainly a storyteller in his
Absolutely.
artwork.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just getting the right writers, like someone like Bill Willingham, to see it and let their imagination go crazy. And my grandpa was, with the exception of Fire and Ice, he was very open to people interpreting his art and writing stories about it and letting whatever it might be. He was very happy for artists to be able to do that. So yeah, and we're working on that. We're working on that. Maybe some new titles with Dynamite, and then of course with Opus. So you'll continue to see stories spawn from Frazetta paintings.
Love it. I just joined. I'm sorry if this has been asked. It hasn't, so you're in luck. Would he draw stuff just for you, or things inspired by you or other family members? That is a good question. Like, I know you
That's
said
a great
that
question.
when you were born, he wasn't the healthiest, right?
Yeah.
But like,
Yeah.
did your grandmother, or did he tell you stories like that? Was it anything inspired by family or friends?
Definitely. So he would paint my grandmother a watercolor for every holiday, even post stroke and left hand, and he made it happen. He didn't want to. No, he did. But my grandma would be like, "You don't love me. You don't love me anymore if you don't deliver some sort of like beautiful nude girl or something cute and funny on my birthday or the holiday." So my grandpa wasn't a shopper, as I mentioned earlier. So his gifts were like portraits. I mean, I have a portrait from when I was a baby. It was a watercolor, and then various other little watercolors he did for me over the years, but they were forced. They were my grandma saying, "You, Frank, if you don't get this done, your granddaughter's also not going to think that you don't love her. So you better get to the studio and paint the watercolor." But no, my art for my grandpa was very much a job, and he did love it early on when he was in his 20s. He'd explore and draw everything, but it was more of the competition of like, when he was with his friends, he was like, who could do the best piece. And then when he would get a job, it was like, again, he was just inspired to like knock it out of the park, to show the publishers and the fans what he could do. But he wasn't like a leisure artist where it was like a therapeutic thing for him, where he'd get into that zone and lose himself. And in fact, he said he'd hate painting sometimes when he'd have to render the details. He loved getting like the composition and the shapes and seeing how it could all come together. But then he said, 6 hours in, he's like, "Oh, kill me. I'd rather be outside doing anything else but this." Because he was an athletic guy. He was wanted to be hitting baseballs.
Yeah. She hit him with the paint me like one of your French girls.
Yeah, that was my grandma, not me. That'd be awkward. But yeah, my grandma said that.
Actually, Sarah talked a little bit about this earlier, talking about some your favorite paintings from that you ended up with, or your favorite pieces of art that you ended up with.
Yeah, I didn't end up with really any original art because it's inheritance, and the kids got their share of the art. My grandpa was really wonderful about making sure it was divided evenly, so it was fair for his 4 kids. And my mom, I think she's gonna hopefully leave me a few. Fingers crossed. I love you, Mom. but as of now, I have my originals, my watercolors, my portrait, and then I've been acquiring some original art back from private. Yeah, very, very not oils, but some. I just got the A1 versus the Nazgul Lord preliminary sketch that was on Heritage Auctions. We bought that back, and I got that framed, and it's like it's just so cool to start acquiring some of it back. little by little, because my whole goal and is to exhibit it. Like anything that I get back, I would want to share with the fans and bring it all over the world, and just have everyone see originals in the flesh and blood, because I just being able to curate the museum with my mom and having the fans come in and seeing like the original Death Dealer 2 and Conan Manape. You see people like start like breaking down in real time and weeping, and the way that fans are moved when they see the originals in person, there's really nothing better than that. So it's like, now that we've been exposed to that and we're seeing that, we're like, oh, we have to keep the originals out for the world to see, because what it does is it's like magical. It really is. That was another really long answer.
No, that was a great answer, though. I love that you're buying it back, and because you want to share it with everybody. The great part of being overseeing editorial as well as co-writing the Vampirella series. She's just beginning. Oh, I love it. All right,
I love you, Nick.
I'll take one more question. Will you marry me? No, I will not.
No,
I got that one.
Omar.
I got that one, Sarah.
I don't even know what you look like.
You
I'm
could
blind,
look like a Frazetta guy. So any last words? Anything you want to say to the audience that that wants to check out Fire and Ice? I think we did a really good job explaining what it was. Definitely,
I mean, Fire and Ice, I mean, it's really issue 1. It leaves you wanting so much more, and I can tell you, like issue 2, 3, you're gonna be crying. You're gonna feel a range of emotions, and that's again great storytelling. You're gonna feel very connected to the characters, immersed in the world, because of Bill and Leonardo's ability, and of course the creative team at Dynamite. It's something we wanted to do because the world is stressful enough. We're reminded of the horrors all the time, and we wanted you to be able to escape for a little bit into a new world. And so for that reason, dive into Fire and Ice. I don't think you'll be disappointed. And I just want to thank all the fans for supporting us and giving us this opportunity to do something like this with the demand. So I just thank you. Frazetta fans are the best fans.
And there you have it. And thank you so much for joining me and taking time out of your day to talk to me about your grandfather's legacy and the projects that you're working on and Frazetta Girls. And yeah, this has been very educational. I always love talking comics, and especially about one of my favorite creators of all time. Again, I have a link in the description of the video where you can get the first issue of Fire and Ice. I want to thank Nick and Vince over at Dynamite for helping set up this interview. And Sarah, you're always welcome back, maybe on your next project, or maybe when we get a collected edition of the first volume of Fire and Ice, or maybe Vampirella.
Awesome.
Whatever. You're always welcome back. Everyone, thank you so much. Hit that like button on the way out. And that's it for us. Much love.